Hi folks, Wooden Boat Dan here. Just wanted to give you a heads up. The podcast you're about to listen to was recorded several years ago, so some of the phone numbers, email addresses, website links, and time-sensitive information are no longer valid. Please keep that in mind as you listen. If you'd like to contact me, my email address is woodenboatdan@gmail.com. Thank you and enjoy the podcast. You have tuned in to Hooked on Wooden Boats weekly podcast episode number 95. Welcome. I'm your host, Dan Matson, aka Wooden Boat Dan the Man. If you can't do it, nobody can. And this is the world's first podcast fully dedicated to celebrating the art, craft, history, tradition, and romance of wooden vessels all over the planet. Welcome to the podcast today, folks. Great to have you on board. Got another action-packed, fun, featured, great show today about wooden boats, about getting in the wooden boat game. The featured segment today is an interview with George Fisher. George lives in Portland, Oregon, and I met George a couple weeks ago at the Bainbridge Island biannual Wooden Boat Festival. Actually, it might have been about a month ago that I was at the festivals. I think it was mid-June. Anyway, George was there on his 1937 Swedish-built 30-square-meter boat called Hansina. And we did an interview that day, and George is an expert on 30-square-meter boats. It's a really fascinating interview, so stick around for that. Well, this past week has been fun in the wooden boat game as usual. I've been working on my ebook, which is basically a guide to planning for your first wooden boat build. I'm really excited about it. It's taken a lot of time, but I don't want to just throw something out there. I want it to be good. I want it to be a guide that somebody could pick up that's never built a wooden boat, and would help them go through the decision-making process about what boat to build and knowing in advance how long it'll take, what it'll cost, what to expect along the way, that kind of thing. So I would say I am 50 to 60% done with that book. My plan is to have that completed before the Port Townsend Wooden Boat Festival in September, because on September 6th and 7th, Friday and Saturday, I'll be giving a presentation each day about building your first wooden boat. And I would like to have the ebook available by then so that people could purchase it if they're interested. As I write the book, I'm having a lot of fun. I'm learning a lot. It's fun doing research. I think it's going to be a valuable resource, so stick around for that. I did receive an email from Anders Sverk. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. Anders, your last name. Anders lives in Sweden. Yeah, we started corresponding last year, I believe it was, because he's been working on a boat, and he just launched it. It's a John Welsford-designed walkabout, which is a 16-foot, 2-inch sailboat. And he sent me some pictures of it there. It's a beautiful boat. Congratulations, Anders, on that build. That is awesome. If you've just finished a boat or you are finishing a boat, shoot me an email, dan@hookedonwoodenboats.com. Let's see, in about 2 weeks, a week and a half. I don't know, what's the date today? It must be July 9th. So, about a week and a half. I will be attending the Pocket Yacht Palooza in Port Townsend, Washington on Saturday, July 20th. If you can make it, head on over there. I'd love to hook up with you and talk shop and have a good time. So I will be there on Saturday, July 20th. Okay, it's time for the weekly Scamp update. Scamp is the 11-foot, 11-inch micro cruising sailboat that I started building June 1st approximately. This week I worked on the boat quite a bit. I'm thinking maybe 15 to 20 hours. And, when you're building a wooden boat, let's say it's a 200-hour boat to build, it's not like you can work on it 8 hours a day, every day, until the 200 hours are up, because typically you've got a step to do which involves epoxy, And then you're waiting for the epoxy to dry, typically overnight if you're using the slow cure stuff. So anyway, I did work on it quite a bit this past week. I just finished building the center board yesterday, which this thing is really beefy. It's got 18 pounds of lead in it. It's a couple pieces of 3/4 inch Akumi marine plywood with 18 pounds of lead towards the bottom of it in the fin. And on top of, once I laminated the two pieces together, put the lead in, then I put on 2 layers of fiberglass cloth, each with 1 coat of epoxy. And then on top of that, 2 coats of epoxy. And then on top of that, 1 coat of epoxy with graphite. So she's all done. She's beautiful. She's black and she's mean looking, and she came out really nice. I faired her up real good, so she's real slick looking. So I got that done, and I got the centerboard trunk fiberglassed and graphited also. So I'm really excited because in the next few days here, I will actually start assembling the boat. I will be installing the centerboard trunk, which goes in and around 3 of the bulkheads. And bulkhead number 4 is actually a bulkhead that goes overhead, so it's an entrance to the small cabin on the Scamp. So once I get those pieces up, I'll actually have 3 dimensions sitting there, which is really exciting. Then my adrenaline's really going to be running. Probably be working on this thing day and night. So anyway, having a lot of fun as usual. So to date, I've got 44.5 hours into the boat and $3,532 in cost. As I mentioned before, I will be selling the boat when she is at the epoxy-coated and assembled stage. And so if you're interested, shoot me an email, dan@hookedonwoodenboats.com. And if somebody were interested in buying the boat fully completed, painted with spars and hardware and everything, then we could talk about that, and I'd be willing to finish her to the very end. So anyway, that's the update on the Scamp. And if you haven't already checked it out, I've got 3 pages on my website where I give a weekly or bi-weekly progress report. I've got some tables there where I basically show my costs to date in detail and the hours I've spent on the boat, and also some tips for building the Scamp. So go to hookedonwoodenboats.com/scamp, which is SCAMP, and you can take a look at that information. Okay, I do have a wooden boat hack of the week. This is hack number 22, and I hope I've got my numbering right on that because I haven't been doing these every week. And this one may seem like a no-brainer, but for years I used a single-speed orbital sander. I believe it was a Porter cable, and it lasted me like 15 years, and then it died. So I bought a new orbital sander. It's a 5-inch, 8-hole sander, and this one is variable speed. Well, what I've found is that variable speed really comes in handy. For example, if I'm epoxy coating, and I've got my 3 coats on a piece of plywood, and now I want to sand it down smooth. If I want to sand it down the day after I've applied the 3rd coat, the epoxy is approximately 80 to 90% cured. And if I put my variable speed sander on its highest setting, it will gum up, because what will happen, it will heat the epoxy because of the speed of the sander, and that'll kind of make the epoxy come off on the sandpaper, and it'll gum up, and I won't be able to sand it very well. But if I put the sander on the lowest setting of 1 with a much slower speed, it doesn't heat up as much, and it's easier to sand the epoxy. Anyway, I do use the higher speeds for epoxy that has cured more, or I want to take more material off. But it really does come in handy having that variable speed on this orbital sander. And for your information, I'm using a DeWalt. It's a model D26453. It's a 3 amp model. It's a 5-inch diameter and has 8 holes for the intake of sawdust, and it is variable speed. And if you are interested in purchasing that, I do have a link set up on Amazon. So if you go to hookedonwoodenboats.com/DeWalt sander, that'll take you to the page on Amazon where you can purchase it for $74. That's the price today anyway. And if you do purchase it, I get paid a small commission, and I would appreciate that. Again, it's a DeWalt D26453, which is what I have, $74. And if you go to hookedonwoodenboats.com/DeWalt sander, you can make that purchase, and I'll get a small commission. And I appreciate if you would do that. Thank you very much. I have some listener feedback today. I'd like to read an email. Dan, just recently came across your podcast, and I am hooked. Living in the middle of the prairie here in central Illinois, I'm kind of lonely as a wooden boat builder. I'm working with some of the youth group from church on a 14-foot flat skiff from Batu Boats out of Florida, and I hope to have it finished by the end of the summer. Keep up the great work. I'll subscribe through iTunes, and I'll leave a positive review for you. God bless, Pete Bergstrom. Pete, thanks for that note. We've been corresponding, Pete and I, a little bit. He's building this flat skiff with his youth group at church. This is really awesome. What a great church project to bring kids together. That is so cool. It's a beautiful boat, and I wish you the best of luck on that. Pete, thank you very much. Also, I'd like to mention, I would really appreciate it, like really, this is a serious request for someone out there to call my voicemail feedback hotline and leave me some feedback similar to this email, except in a voice form so I could play it on the show. That would be really cool. It's really easy to do. Go to hookedonwoodenboats.com/voicemail. That'll take you to my SpeakPipe page, and you can click on the button there and do up to 90-second recording. It will send me a digital file of the recording, which I could play on the podcast. So I would really appreciate it if somebody someone out there would do that. I rarely get those, and I'm not sure why, but would really like it if you do that. Send me some feedback or ask a question about wooden boat building or something like that. I would really appreciate it. Okay, again, that's hookedonwoodenboats.com/voicemail. I would like to give a shout out to new subscribers to my monthly newsletter, electronic newsletter. Pete Bergstrom, who I just mentioned, he's building a 14-foot flat skiff with the church group in Illinois. Tom Lawler, Bob Barnett, and Harm Zoodmere. And Harm lives in New Zealand, and we've been corresponding. He's working on a Hartley boat restoration, and he also has a Sunburst, which is a little 12-foot sailboat, which is really cool, and he gets out with his kids. And he started listening to my podcast recently and is liking it. So welcome to the newsletter to Pete, Tom, Bob, and Harm. And if you haven't yet signed up for my monthly newsletter, it's real easy to do. For $50 a month, you can get the newsletter. No, I'm just kidding. It's free. Can you believe that? Best deal on the planet. Go to hookedonwoodenboats.com/subscribe. Leave your first and last name and your email address, and you'll be on the newsletter list. And I send it out pretty much every month, tell you kind of what's happening at Hooked on Wooden Boats, some projects I'm working on. I share videos and other fun things, and it's a way for me to connect with you. So please do that, hookedonwoodenboats.com/subscribe. We are going to move on to the interview now with George Fisher and his 30-square-meter yacht, Hansina. So take it away, George. Okay, it's June 15th, 2013. I'm at the Bainbridge Island Wooden Boat Festival, and sitting next to me is George Fisher. George, welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
George, we're sitting on a gorgeous boat here that you've recently restored. But before we get into that, tell me a little bit about your personal history and boating you did growing up and that sort of thing.
Okay. Good question. One day when I was, if I had to guess, I was like 11, maybe, and my dad came home and out of the blue announced at the dinner table that he had bought a 30 square meter. And everyone said, what's a 30 square meter? I mean, and he was not a sailor. We lived on Long Island Sound, so we were around the water a lot and had rowboats in New York.
Yeah.
And so my mother was not bothered, but he took the family out to the boatyard to see it the next day. And it was 40-footer, and my mother just freaked out. But I just looked at it, and I just said, wow, look at that. And it was an older version of the boat that we're in now. And I sailed on that boat with my family until I went away to college.
Well, what year did your dad buy that boat?
That would have been 62, I think. Yeah, 61 or 62, right in that range.
So was that his first boat?
He had I'm the fourth and last child in the family. When my oldest sister was still at home, he had a little Cape Cod knockabout that I never learned to sail. The thing leaked like a sieve, and one night sank, and nobody did anything about it. So that was I was weaned on the 30 square meter.
Wow.
So by the time I was 14, I stole the boat one day and sailed it myself. And
when you were 14?
When I was 14, and
without your parents' knowledge.
My parents didn't know I'd taken it out.
Single-handed.
And I did fine. I was like, wow, I can do this. And I don't know anything about, apparent wind and I was like,
true wind and all.
You just keep on staring at the top of that jib, and that's all you need to know. That was the extent of what I knew about sailing.
Yeah.
And I had some great times with that. And then I think my mother finally had suspicions. I never admitted it. And by the time I was in high school, I was bringing some kids that I went to school with to go out. And
did that have a little inboard or an outboard or anything?
No.
No power.
It had no power. Well, it had power, but I mean, it was laughable. It was one of those, what are they called? Those English ones, the seagulls.
Oh.
With a bracket on the side, and those things were the most fickle.
So it was a little tiny outboard.
It was a little tiny outboard, and you had to have a bracket that fit on the jib track. And I was always afraid I was going to drop it into the water, and you bang up everything in sight, getting it out from underneath the deck. And then you had to get it to start. And then when you got it to start, some motorboat would come by and just, drown it. So,
really?
Yeah, so you really learned how to...
Was that a two-stroke motor or four-stroke? Do you know?
I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know. But my dad, before I went away to college, did put a little auxiliary in it. And it didn't work out well for him, as I understood. And 3 or 4 years after I went away to school, he sold the boat. And about 5 years after that, it went down in a storm. Mm-hmm. And that was the end of it. So, and I didn't go back to sailing. Long Island Sound was my home. But I've been traveling west. And so I went to school in Michigan and then got married, went back to New York for a short period of time. Moved to North Dakota and farmed for 10 years. And then 1997, we moved to Portland.
Oregon?
Portland, Oregon. And that's where I told you the story earlier, where I've been living and working. And
yeah, so tell me that story again for our listeners.
I never really... well, let me preface it this way. When I decided to move, and it was my decision to move to Northwest, I'm from the East Coast. I didn't want to go back there. I'd been in the Midwest for over 10 years, and I had a belly full of that. I didn't want to stay in the Midwest. I can't stand the heat, so I'm not going to the Southwest. That left the upper left-hand corner. And I looked at the map, and it's like, great, it's on the ocean. So the first thing I did when I moved here is I said, I'm going to go to the beach. I had no idea it was 80 miles away. And it was a very hostile, Oregon coast.
From Portland.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I said, well, that's so much for that deal. And then I got my law practice started, and I had a business out of state, and I was waiting for a plane flight home. Saw the ad for one that was for sale in Port Huron, Michigan.
An ad for what?
For a 30 square meter.
Okay.
And I had not seen one. I was taking Wooden Boat just out of nostalgia, and it never really occurred to me that...
Wooden Boat magazine?
Yeah, that I would really do something about it. I guess that's the right word.
Yeah.
And when my wife said, yeah, you should buy that boat, I was like stunned. Both the fact that she would be supportive, and then number two, that it never occurred to me that that was something that I might like to do. And it became an obsession. I really lost all perspective. I really did. No,
so you flew out to Lake Huron and looked at this boat?
I looked at this boat, and I have been collecting anything 30 square meter since I was in high school. And I wrote a lot of letters and got a lot of neat photographs and articles and all this kind of stuff because it was a very active and a premier racing boat in the 1930s. So there were celebrities who were owning these boats, and they had money that no one else had.
Were they racing around the world or mainly Europe or what?
Well, they are a Swedish boat in origin, and they are still a very active and successful class on the continent. There are thousands of German and Swedish and Norwegian 30 square meters that are both brand new or preserved older boats. There was 10 years of stardom in the United States for these boats, and that would have been in the 1930s.
Oh, really?
And so in Marblehead, they had a fleet of about 30 boats.
In Massachusetts?
In Massachusetts,
yeah.
And like I said, some celebrity owners had those boats, and the racing was... I collected all the race results from Marblehead in 1937, 36, 35,
really?
all the way back to 1929 when the first boat got here. And something happened. I mean, some key people left the class, and money, the war, and that whole kind of magic time that's all it is now. You go to Eastern Yacht Club in Massachusetts and go to their archive, and they have the old glass print photographs of all the racing that was going on. You see all these old boats that 30 square meters that they were racing very competitively. 300 races a year. I mean, it's just...
Wow.
That's crazy. It's crazy as it sounds.
Right.
So it was just a great story that I've always...
Yeah, so you flew back there and then you shipped a boat out to Oregon?
Well, when I was collecting my stuff when I was in high school, I would write a letter on my dad's business correspondence, and I would write as an adult manner, business manner as I could, because my dad had his own business. And I said, I have a 30 square meter. I'd like to know whether there are any others out there, and I know you've been told you had a plane. Can you send me some pictures? I got piles of stuff that came back, and it really became like this, wow, I heard the story about this boat and that boat and that boat, but I don't hear anything about this boat. So I go and I did histories on every one of the boats that had been imported. And I can pretty much tell you.
Really?
I have the dimensions, I have a picture, I have a letter, I have an article, I have whatever.
Wow, you're like a 30 square boat museum.
Yeah, over the top.
How many boats have you tracked here in the U.S.?
55.
Really?
Yeah, I can tell you some more. Let's see, there would be about 25 boats left out of the 55, of which of that number, about 6 are in good sailing condition. Everything else is awaiting rescue. Some of them it's too late. I know where they are, but they're just sawdust. I mean, you
Yeah.
can get some hardware off of it, but that's about it.
You have to start over.
Yeah, they're just melting. They're leaning against a barn somewhere and,
Yeah.
going down. Well, I had, when I was in high school and sending all these letters out, I sent one to a guy up on Bear Island in Maine, and he sent me back some pictures. A very nice man, wrote a very nice letter. And then I always follow up and ask for more. Then I would call up and I would do it again. I'd just really be a pest. And one day, I think I was a junior in high school at that time, the phone rang. My mother picked it up and she goes, "Yes." And she looked at me and she said, "Somebody named Fred Reynolds is on the phone." I was like, uh-oh. And I get on the phone and I say, "Is this George?" The guy says, "Is this George?" Says, "Yeah, hi, how you doing?" Yeah, right. He said, "Listen, I got your letter. I'm more than willing to get you more photographs and things. But listen, why don't you just drive up here and I'll take you for a ride?" And I just said, "I'm in trouble." Because he thought I was an adult.
Oh, right.
And I said, "Well, I got to tell you, I'm a junior in high school." There's just dead silence on the other side. And the next thing I hear is, "Just get here," and he hangs up.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So a buddy of mine and I got his family to loan us a car, and we drove up to Maine and saw this boat on the mooring.
You did?
And he took us for a short sail.
Oh, this was the boat.
Yeah, and that's when I found
that
out.
day.
That's when I found out that it was a Buckminster Fuller boat, because
It was a what now?
it was Buckminster Fuller's boat. Buckminster Fuller sold the boat to the guy who's now giving me a ride in the same boat.
I see.
And so Fred was the retired CFO for Western Electric. So the boat got excellent care for many decades.
Yeah.
When he passed, it went to Michigan, and it was taken care of there, but, they had a competitive fleet there of about 10 boats for several years. But the boats they just weren't maintaining them, and so people were moving away from it. So when I went and called this chap, when my wife said, "Go buy this boat," I didn't know.
You didn't know it was that boat?
I didn't know it was that boat.
Oh,
And
you're kidding.
He comes in and I'm sitting around his table, and he had a big barn out in back where he kept his own 30 square meter. And he said, "Well, let's go out and look at the boats." And I said, "Okay." So we go out into the barn, and he opens the door, and there it is. And I'm thinking, "Oh my God, I know that boat."
Really?
And it was still bright. It never had paint on it. But the bottom, below the waterline, it was just gone. And the destruction on the cockpit, the deck was all rotted, and the boat had been dropped and badly repaired so that the keel not only canted to the port, it also turned to the port. So it was
Really?
you could only go on a starboard.
Really?
And that was the reason it got beached.
Oh.
And the guy who had it just was enough of an enthusiast and had the space that when it sat outside for 2 years, he just bought it for like $100 or something and stuck it in the barn. And it was there for 10 years before I showed up.
Really?
And so I bought it on the spot. I was paid $3,000 for it, which was robbery, but I wanted this boat.
You were too emotionally attached.
I was. My
You wouldn't
judgment
pay any-
was just impaired. I had no sense of reality, no sense of responsibility, no fiscal wisdom, And so I bought a trailer, and I designed and had a guy weld it together for me in Michigan to put the boat on this trailer. And I towed it from Port Huron all the way to Portland.
Really?
That was in 2005.
2005.
And the serious work started late in 2005. It wasn't completely finished in 2009, but we were at a point where we said, it's time to put this boat in the water and see what it's going to do and all that kind of stuff. So in August of 2009, I brought it up here, and we sailed it for 2 months. I hauled it all the way
up
back.
to Bainbridge Island?
We brought it up here.
Yeah.
And at about November of that year, I took it back to Washougal, and we did some more work on it. And I've been coming here ever since. And then I said, like I said, the benefactor for my boat is Jim Llewellyn, who's got a space for it, wants it there, likes looking at it, is helpful beyond fault. But for him, the boat would be not as good a condition as it is now.
Yeah.
And we just it's Spartan. Let's put it that way. My wife and I sleep on it on occasion.
Yeah.
But it's not a cruising boat. But we just really love sailing the boat. It's a great boat to sail.
So is her home port in Portland, Oregon then?
Yeah. After 2 years, we joined the Port Madison Yacht Club. Mm-hmm. And I was attracted to go there because there was renovation on 6 meters going on. And on Long Island Sound, it's funny how, it's not that big a universe.
Yeah.
A lot of the 6 meters I see at Port Madison, I saw on Long Island Sound because Northport Harbor, where I came out of, was the next harbor over from Oyster Bay, where the Vanderbilts and all those guys did all of their racing, and they were really big-time 6 meter people. And the boat right next to us was there when I was there. Mm-hmm. And so to come across the country and be in a 30 square meter in the Northwest when I had seen these boats on Long Island Sound, 40 years ago is kind of cool. And I'm so happy. There's a couple of new boats that's come to Port Madison that 6 meters.
Yeah.
That can be traced back to Long Island.
Now, where is Port Madison exactly?
It's on the north end of Bainbridge Island.
Okay.
And so we're about 15 miles away from it here, something like that.
Okay. So give me the specifics on this boat.
Yeah.
George, the year and size and all that stuff.
Sure. The boat was, the lines for the boat was designed in 1935.
Okay.
And the reason that is that the international rule changed to allow an additional 5 inches on the freeboard of any of the boats, as long as it still was in the formula number of 30 square meters.
Yeah.
And so that was a big deal, and my boat is the beneficiary of that because my dad's boat did not have it was like 14 inches from the waterline.
Yeah.
Very wet boat. Just wet, and more wet. The 5 inches is like night and day.
Yeah.
And so that's why this boat is as big as it is, because when they made it higher, they had to make it wider, and they had to make it longer. And so that design was an anticipation of a international race between Sweden and the United States in 30 square meters in 1938. And a boat was built by a syndicate of owners in Massachusetts on a boat called Pilgrim, which I found later after I bought my boat. And I bought it, and I gave it away to a chap in Spokane who's restoring it. But this boat is a sister to that boat.
Oh,
it's
really?
Almost identical.
Okay, yeah.
And that means that it's, again, 44 feet long. It's about 7.5 feet wide. She draws 4 foot 7 inches, I think. There's 2,900 pounds of lead on the bottom. We've put on new teak deck. We've done some things that an original 30 square meter would not have. The teak deck is over plywood and epoxy. It's watertight. If I put back the cedar deck, leakage, rot, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And if I'm putting all this money into it, who cares? I'm the only 30 square meter in the Northwest that's sailing around at this point.
Right.
I'm going to put a deck on here that's going to work.
Nice. Yeah.
And the boat is dry. The boat is very dry.
So she was built in 1937 in Sweden?
Winter of 37-38. Yeah. Sometime after the war, the boat had been hidden. I don't know where. There was also a suggestion that the boat had not been in the water, but that someone took the lead off for making bullets, I guess. But that was restored in the late 1940s, and that it's also unclear about whether Fuller directly imported it or whether it was imported by somebody else in California, because I have a sale slip from a realtor out there, and they were trying to sell it, and the next thing I know, the boat's on the East Coast. And that would be about 51. And, well, I'll show you right here. Some of these are going to have to be repaired, but I built a plate for every owner and the year that they owned it and where they were.
Very cool.
So this is this guy A. Johansson from Sweden. I don't know anything more about him than that.
1938.
1938. He got the boat certified as a 30 square meter because he had put in the order for the creation of the boat. Now, 1950 is what I put down. And Buckminster Fuller bought the boat at that point. He was living in New York, but the boat was always in Maine. And then he sold it to the fellow I spoke about, who I sailed on it with, this Fred Reynolds here. And he was a very wealthy man, had a separate home up in Maine, but he was in New Jersey. And then when he sold it to another local there, he only had it for a very short time before the boat went out to Port Huron in 1971.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Now, I was still collecting things, and I was in contact with a club at that time. And I was the only one that knew what the correct American sale number should be. So when this guy bought this boat and made it U.S. 30 square meter number 44, I was the one that did that. Not knowing that I would ever own the boat.
Oh, my goodness.
So that was another reason when I saw it, I kind of said, I know about this. Ken Peck is passed. He got very ill and lost his boat. This guy here is where the most...
Ken and Penelope Peck.
Ken Peck, It was during their ownership that most of the deterioration
happened. They didn't take care of it.
He just wasn't healthy.
Yeah.
And the guy whose name here is on 1994, the guy who bought it for $100.
Levac?
Yeah, Levac, yeah. He's the one who needs the hat tip, because he just, like I said, he spent the $100. He had the facility, and he gave that facility space.
He just kept it from
there.
getting in worse shape.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
And then the last one right now is with Room for More, is my name and my wife's when we got the boat in 2005.
Very cool. So will you keep it here at Port Madison or down in Portland?
Port Madison.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh no, there's no place to sail a boat like this. And,
right.
I mean, how many times can you go back between I-5 and 205?
Yeah.
And against a 3 mile an hour current always.
Yeah. I grew up in Vancouver, Washington, and we did power boating on the river in the 60s and early 70s as a kid. So I'm pretty familiar with that area.
Yeah. Well, I thought, talking about naive, and you could certainly tell that I wasn't from the Northwest. You know, I looked at the chart of the river as it goes through Vancouver and Portland, and there's these numbers like 10, 15, 6, 7, 8. I thought they were fathoms.
Oh, yeah.
And then when somebody said, no, this is all in feet, then I saw the majority of depths were like a huge part of the river was that's not deep at all.
Yeah.
And this boat would have to stay in the commercial channel, and that's not. No, I couldn't do that.
Yeah.
But you know, there is something to say to have your boat. Hi, how are you? So what else do you need to know?
Okay, we're back here.
We're back?
So anything else you want to add, George? Appreciate you doing this interview today on the spur of the moment.
Oh, not at all. You know, I bring the boat to the show because, you know, my fondest fantasy is that somebody is going to say, you know, I want a boat like that, because I think that it's a great design, and it does require a huge commitment and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, they are available, and they're waiting for someone to come and get them, you know. And so anybody who wants to do that, you know, give them my address. I know where they are.
Well, do you want to give your contact, your email or something here?
Sure.
Anybody listening, George?
Yeah, sure, that'd be fine. My email is George, George .Fisher, FISHER, at GPF, as in George Paul Fisher, -law.com.
Okay, very cool. Yeah. Well, thanks for taking the time today, George. Appreciate you having on the podcast.
Well, thanks for letting me chatter.
Okay, very good. Thanks a lot.
You bet.
All right. Thanks, George, for taking the time to do that interview. It was really fun sitting on your boat and recording that. You've got a beautiful rig there, and I wish you the best in all your future sailing with Hansina. Okay, earlier in the show, I failed to mention that Friday, July 5th, I did attend the 37th Annual Lake Union Wooden Boat Festival in Seattle, Washington, and I had an absolute blast. I got there first thing in the morning when they opened at 10, started taking pictures. Then I talked to my friend Mindy Ross there, who I interviewed a few episodes back. She's a sailing instructor. Told her I was hoping to get out on a rowboat to take some pictures, so she got me lined up with a rowboat, and I got out on the water, and I was out for maybe an hour and a half or 2 hours taking pictures from the water of the boats and everything, which was really fun. I hadn't done that before, but it gives you a vantage point that's pretty sweet. So I had a blast doing that. So I took 237 pictures. And I'm pretty particular with my pictures. I would say out of the 237, there's probably 5 to 10 that I really like. Or would be good enough to go on my calendar for 2014, my Hooked on Wooden Boats calendar. But anyway, talk shop with a lot of people, met some new folks. I did have the privilege of interviewing Betsy Davis, who's the executive director of the Center for Wooden Boats, and I'll be airing that here on the podcast in a couple weeks, so stick around for that. But the Schooner Adventurous was there, the Schooner Zodiac, the MV Lotus, the Flying Cloud, which was an Ed Monk boat that I interviewed the owner of last year, Lloyd Shugart. I was there for 8 hours and had a great time. They do a super job. Plan on going next year if you missed this year. It's a July 4th time frame each year for 3 to 5 days, and it's really great. So there you go. If you'd like to connect with me, you can shoot me an email, dan@hookedonwoodenboats.com. You can go to my website, hookedonwoodenboats.com, and leave a comment on the podcast show notes. And you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, and YouTube if you look for Wooden Boat Dan there. And I would appreciate it if you would send me pictures and stories. And also, if you go to the iTunes store, to the podcast section, and look up Hooked on Wooden Boats, you can subscribe to the podcast there. And also, I would appreciate it while you're there if you would leave a review for the show. You can leave 1 to 5 stars and some comments, and that would be really cool. I haven't checked in the last couple weeks, but I'm guessing I have around 40 or so 5-star reviews, which is pretty sweet. If you enjoy the podcast, you can buy products through my website that you would probably normally buy anyway, and I make a small commission. So if you go to my homepage, and on the right-hand side, you'll see banners there for Amazon, Jamestown Distributors, and West Marine. If you click on any of those and make a purchase, I get paid a small commission. You can also go to hookedonwoodenboats.com/store, where you can buy gear like t-shirts, hats, mugs, that sort of thing. I get paid a little bit there. And I would really appreciate any support that you could give me in that way, especially if it's items that you're already purchasing anyway. That would really help out. Well, have a great week, folks. Get out on the water, get in the wooden boat game, do something. At least go buy a Wooden Boat magazine and read it cover to cover. Have a great week, folks. Good talking to you. Keep the bright side up and the sunny side down. Wooden Boat Dan, over and out. God bless.